The resource is God waiting for a date with you is really born out of just fixing our eyes on Jesus, who, it says in Luke 5:16, Jesus often slipped away to solitary places to be alone with God. Actually, he did that in different spaces, different places, outdoor settings. It says in Matthew chapter 13, one morning he just got up and got out of the house and went and sat by the lake. In another spot in Matthew 14, it says that he got in a boat and headed out to just get away, push back from life as it was happening, to get alone with the one who was the source of everything he needed to be able to keep on, as John, who wrote his gospel account of Jesus, said, man, there's not even enough books on the planet to reveal all the stuff that Jesus did. Maybe you're pushing pretty hard and you don't realize that, you realize it with your electronics that you've got to reboot, recharge, but you don't realize that key to the significance of your success and the potency of your impact has everything to do with you having what we would call dates with God. Intentional times where you push back, as Jesus modeled, you push back from how things are happening in your life, and you get alone with the one who alone cares for you and cares for the reboot that you need. So let's talk a little bit about what's a date with God look like. For Jesus, who set forth an example, he pushed back from ordinary life. I would encourage you, get someplace that's out of the ordinary for you. Don't stay in your apartment or your house or your condo, because if you stay there, dishes are going to remind you that they need cleaned up, and laundry is going to be noticeable, or your yard, or whatever it is that can become a distraction, because that's where you do life. So I'd encourage you, literally go someplace where none of that work is yours to do. You don't feel responsible for it. So whether that's an outside location, I've got a state park I love to go to, and I've got a little spot that I've found that nobody else seems to have discovered. I go down a ravine and around a corner, and I've got a little place I've got tucked in. It's kind of near some water where I can hear the water, and I take my little pop-out chair and I pop that out down there, and I've got all my supplies for my date with God, and that's one spot. But I've also got, if it's an inclement weather day, I've got a Panera Bread that architecturally, they must have made a mistake, because there's this little alcove off by itself where it's just really a table for one. And I try to get there early enough that I get dibs on that table. And I had a woman who said a coffee shop was her, what she called Garden of Gethsemane. That was where she said, I love to have a cup of coffee in my hand when I'm having my date with God. So indoor locations, we've had people borrow our house because they don't feel responsible for our workload. And I've borrowed other people's spaces. I've asked a pastor, could I use a classroom at your church they sit empty all week, borrow that. If it's bad weather, you can use one of those spaces that is just sitting there waiting for someone like you. And I usually put a sign on the door that says, important meeting in process, do not open this door, or do not disturb, because I don't want anybody stepping in on my date alone with God. So whether it's an outdoor location, an indoor location, the first thing you've got to do is decide where you're going to do it. And the second thing you got to do is get it on your calendar, schedule it. You've got to get it scheduled. Nobody's going to walk up to you and say, let me schedule a date for you with God. No, nobody's going to do that for you. You have to do it for you. Just like you take your device to reboot it and you plug it in. You don't have somebody monitoring, keeping your battery charges going. Spiritually, would you take responsibility and go, I got to get these on my calendar? How often? You ask God, figure it out. He'll help you know, but is it once a month? Is it once a quarter? We literally at our ministry organization, we provide a free day on a regular work day. We just say, we think it's so important to your best deliverable is your intimacy with God. You just take a day off work and we'll pay you for that day, but go get with God. And we provide that once a quarter. We've had people tell us they like to do one a month. I've had seasons in my life where it's been a hard season. It's draining my battery dry, and I need one a week. And it may not look like 5 hours or 4 hours or even 2. It might be something as simple as a walk and talk date with God. Did you know that of the ancients, they a lot of times they would say, like, Noah walked with God or Enoch walked with God, and that can be, for some of us, a really valuable way to have a date with God. I had a woman tell me just yesterday that when she's moving, whether she calls it deadheading through her flower garden, taking the dead off, and she said God and I talk during those times. And for some of us, we're kinesthetic learners, so we do better to just do things with God, go on a drive with God, or go on a walk with God. That might be something that you want to do, but let me give you a supply list once you get it on your calendar, because listen, we do this all the time. You see somebody that you need time with, you see them at a wedding, or you see them at a funeral or a graduation or a special event, and you go, we got to get together sometime. And you have said that more than once with that person. When's it going to happen? When you pull out your calendars and you get it scheduled. So I want to encourage you, before you step back from this teaching, if you would just take a calendar and plan your first one, and then decide that on your first date with God, that you're not going to walk away from that without scheduling your second. That's the way they're going to continue to happen. That every time you're having a date, you're going to figure out when your next one is, and you're going to set it and then protect it. What do I mean by protect it? Don't give it away to anybody. For your priority relationships in life, you wouldn't give a date away to somebody. Well, I'll go with you instead. No. So don't give it to anybody. Just tell them, and don't feel embarrassed about this. Just say, hey, I'm booked. I can't do it. I'm already scheduled. Yes, you are. You scheduled this with the most important one in your life, your highest priority relationship. Now, literally, if you have to, because you've got to find a spot and that's the only spot, then just make sure that you're making the exchange and you've rescheduled simultaneously where your date with God's going to be, knowing that it's the most important relationship in your life. And you want to maintain that because it's true. Your date with God, did you know your most effective witness on the planet is your witness with God? In fact, Jesus even said it this way. He said, if you abide, or you kind of hang out, you spend time with, you get with anybody who abides in me, you're going to bear much fruit. Most of us want our life I want fruit out of my life to impact people. And Jesus promised, if we give time and attention to abiding or getting with, you're going to bear much fruit. So what do I take on a date with God? This is where it gets fun, because one of the things you get to take, of course, is your Bible, because this is going to provide more opportunity for you than you do on a daily basis. You know how it is. We got to keep checking our watch, to get to work on time or school on time, and so when you're reading maybe in the morning, you got to keep checking the clock. But you got time to read a whole book of the Bible. You could read all 5 chapters of James, and you could look for I call it a 5-star verse. What's a 5-star verse? It's sort of like the hotel chain system, if you stay in a 3-star, 4-star, what's a 5-star? It's the best one. So I'm looking for 5-star verses, and I literally will just take my pen and I'll asterisk, wow, that's a 5-star, and I'll put 5 stars out. And then when I've, on my date, had a chance to read all 5 chapters, I'll go back and say, I wonder if I could just memorize this 5-star verse. And sort of like for you, when you've been out with a friend and a song came on the stereo system on your car, and now every time you hear that song, you think about, I was with so-and-so when I heard that. You'll have 5-star verses that are going to remind you of dates you had at a state park or a coffee shop or at somebody else's place that you borrowed. And you go, I remember that was a cool time. And so 5-star verse. Or you could do a topical study. I remember on one of my dates, I did a topical study on the word. I just looked up the word kindness. Where were all the Bible verses on kindness? One other time I was struggling with, I felt like God needed to get control of my tongue. It could be a dangerous instrument. And I did a word study on just where were all the scriptures on tongue. And I just looked up tongue through a Bible concordance app and started reading those during my date with God. And I started writing them down, and God began to use that to help me That's the second thing you want to take. Your Bible, yes, that's number one, but take a notebook with you. Couple of reasons why you'd take a notebook. One is because some of you, I mean, let's be honest, do you actually express yourself better through writing than you do talking? Like you feel like when you talk, you fumble a little bit, but when you write it, it really kind of gets out. If that's you, like maybe write a letter to God or write your thoughts out before Him. That would be valuable for you to do, or just sit with your pen in hand and say, hey, God, is there some stuff you've been waiting to tell me? I'm ready, go ahead. Sometimes you'll find that God's going to share some things with you, whether it's while you're reading scripture or when you're just in a listening posture. You might want to use that notebook and a pen to go down through the alphabet. I've encouraged people to consider expressing yourself to God. Sometimes we don't express our heart to God. And part of what's keeping our relationship a little dry is we're not pushing ourselves to, love grows through communication. So what you might want to do is consider the alphabet, like, Lord, you are A, amazing or awesome or astounding, or Lord, you are B, beautiful, bold, bountiful. I had one woman say bodacious, and I said, well, what is that? Bodacious. Oh, just get over it, Dwight. He is bodacious. Lord, you are C, caring, creative. Good. Yeah, when you get to Q and Z, it'll be a little challenging, like playing the alphabet game, but push yourself on your date with God to, sometimes when I'm alone on a date with my wife, I want to say some things that just an ordinary schedule of daily life and routines, I haven't had the time to say. Express yourself. Let love communication grow your relationship. Whether you're taking notes of things that He's sharing with you, or whether you're writing your love letter to Him, or maybe it's not a notebook. Maybe it's literally one of these notebooks where for some of us, when all of our digits are involved, not just one hand, our heart is engaged, and we're just sitting there on a date with God, just and then maybe it's a letter of anger. I don't like this. This is what David the psalmist, who was a man after God's heart, some of it he's ticked off, like, God, why are the bad guys getting the good stuff and the good guys are getting the bad stuff, and where are you anyway? And he's just upset, and he's letting it out, and God's probably going, it's about time. Let's have an honest relationship. And he even said of David, he's a man after my heart. So sometimes it might just be, like this. Or maybe you say, I actually do more communicating, not with all my digits, but, I'm texting all my friends. Maybe pull out your phone on a date with God. And when's the last time you text God? And you're going, I don't know His number. Well, does it matter? He's like over your shoulder, and from your heart, you're just letting it go. And He's reading every word. Your heart is expressing itself, and that's what needs release to the one priority relationship in your life that means more than any relationship you'll ever have. Your greatest gift to this world is going to be the intimacy that you have with Him. Push the envelope and use, whether it's a handwritten notebook or it's one of these or it's just this. Communicate. Third thing I'm going to encourage you to take on your date with God is worship music. And what that's about is just for you, like, is it not true? Let me ask you a question. Does music express better for you your feelings and your thoughts than you know how to put into words? Like, whether it was written words or spoken words, like music just helps you, you'd go, yeah, that's how I feel. Like that song, like that's my song. Then if that's true, take worship music into your date with God. And a lot of times I'll pull music on. Maybe I'll borrow something from a friend. I'll ask him, is there some new music you've been listening to? And sometimes I'll listen to other people's worship music and I'll go, yeah, that's the way I feel. But other times I'll bust into something like crazy new. It doesn't rhyme. It doesn't make sense. I learned this from a child once who asked me if I wanted to hear her sing a song. She starts singing, He's my mighty God, my mighty God, my mighty, mighty, mighty God. Thank you, God. I love you, God. And then she was done. That was her song. And she's a little girl, so I said, wow, that was good. She said, you want to hear another one? And she closed her eyes and sang another song to God. And I went, is that what David meant when he said, sing a new song to the Lord? Like, just from your gut, from your heart. Why don't you just he doesn't care. It doesn't have to be beautiful. It doesn't have to rhyme. Get over it. Like he loves to hear a joyful noise. When my kids were little, they made noises, and if they were joyful, I kind of leaned in, like, what are they happy about? What are they excited about? Man, it's a great day, God. Thank you. Thanks for loving me. You're awesome, God. It's a joyful noise. Man, let his Papa, Abba, Daddy ears, like, just hear a little bit of your voice. Whenever children are up front singing, whether it's, at a preschool or whatever, I look away from the children and I turn and I try to get a vantage point seat where I can look at all the parents. And they're the ones who are the kids are up there singing, but the parents are, that's my kid. They're all stoked. And that's how your Abba Father will be if you would just let it loose maybe and sing along with a worship song or sing a new song. Worship music might be a valuable thing. Or take I had a kid who saw a hymn book in my house the other day, and he said, hey, I've seen one of those once before. My grandparents, I saw one at my grandparents' house. Maybe borrow one of those and just read down through the worship words that are on there. And let that lift your heart to God. Or read a psalm. Did you know the Psalms were actually their first worship book? Like, all the Psalms, and maybe read one of those as a way to express what you say. I have a hard time with words. Well, let worship take you there. Fourth thing to take on your date with God is, I'd call it a prayer book, but it's really just a tablet, someplace you're keeping track of who you're praying for. We provide them from Forge, Kingdom Building Ministries. We provide something called a Spiritual Life Notebook, where you can keep track of who and what you're praying. The cool thing on your date with God is you could literally pray for your whole extended family, or you went to a class reunion for your school and you could pray for a lot of those that you were with. You've got time to pray for things or people or your neighborhood. Like, even if you don't know their names, like, just by house, you got time to do that. And you could cover some territory, and maybe even before you finish, there's a couple that are really on your heart. You might just pause and send a note. Sometimes Paul would send little notes and things. He was the Apostle Paul. He was writing. He'd go, hey, I prayed this for you. Or, man, I've been wrestling in prayer for you. Maybe just send somebody encouragement. Like, hey, I was on a little date with God today, and I spent time, I was thinking about you, and I just felt like I wanted to spend time praying for you. And so I did. Be encouraged, man. You're not alone. And sometimes that's a valuable part of kind of the post-date communication, of letting somebody know you and God spent some time and they were on your heart and mind, and you talked to Him about them, and you hope they're blessed and encouraged and helped. Take a prayer book with you, something you're keeping track of what you're praying about. I'd encourage you to maybe take a little spiritual book of some sort, a devotional book. There's a lot of great ones out there. Some people love to use an old classic called My Utmost for His Highest, but man, there's a bunch of cool devotional books, or some old classics like from A.W. Tozer or Andrew Murray. And don't read the whole book. I mean, come on, this is your date with God, not with Andrew Murray or A.W. Tozer, but maybe read a couple pages to just kind of push your thinking and your heart to new places, because that person's kind of farther down the path, and you go, man, that's kind of cool. And let that come into that kind of loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. It pushed your mind a little farther on your date to think new, fresh thoughts that you just communicate with God about. A couple other things here that one of these is actually my favorite, because to be honest with you, food and a good time are synonymous for me. I love food. Maybe you do too. You're a food lover, and really good food, fun food. So I read once, the Westminster Catechism says the chief end of man is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. And I went, man, if I'm having an enjoyable time, there's usually food around. So on my date with God, I have a bag that I stop by the kitchen and I get grapes and apples and cheese and crackers and all kinds of healthy stuff. And then I go to the convenience store and I buy my favorite candy bar I don't usually let myself have, and a soda. And I've got, you would laugh because it's way more food than I'm going to consume on a date with God. But I want options, So I kind of get my food spread out, and I got my Bible out, and I'm reading James. Oh God, that's so good. Eating a couple more grapes. Whoa, there's a 5-star verse, and I'm marking that one down. Some crackers and cheese. And oh, wow, this is good. And I put the worship bud in, and I'm listening to some music. Oh yeah, whoa, yeah, that's the way I feel about you. That too. And food for me, you can fast if you want to. I mean, I've done that on occasion, but it's a slim occasion. Yes, I fast as a regular, but not on my dates with God, because a date with God is time of great enjoyment, and probably one of the coolest moments of my date with God is I get rid of this thing. I just take my watch off before the date begins, and I tuck it somewhere. If I'm in an outdoor setting, I leave it in the car, but I make a big ordeal about it and go, God, I hate every day I have to keep checking, I don't know. I don't like it when people are talking to me and they keep looking at their watch. I usually want to say to somebody, if you need to be somewhere, just, you're cool, just go. And God, every day I feel like I have to keep checking the clock to make sure I'm going to get to the next thing on time. But not today, man. I've had this date on my calendar for a while, and I'm chill. I'm so done with this. Time is not going to be our controller. God, I just want to hang with you. I want to be with you. And some days I'll walk with God. I'll just push back from all these things. I'll leave them in this little location. I'll go for a walk. Sometimes, quite honestly, I'm tired, and I'll read a little bit and I'll feel tired, and I take a blanket sometimes, one of these little fold-up blankets, and I'll just lay down and take a nap with God, curl up with Him. One day I'd taken a walk with God, and it started raining, and I had a hoodie on. I kind of pulled the hood up, and it's such a cool date memory with God, because I was really kind of, my heart was, it was not on my sleeve, man. This date with God was maybe the most intimate I'd ever had, and those little gentle rain that was kind of happening, almost felt good, like, God, I get it, man. I'm just being showered in your love. This is cool. But then it turned into hard rain, and I'm beelining back to my spot and getting out of some wet clothes, and I was tired. I was relaxed, and I laid down to take a little nap with God and said, God, I'm just going to snooze a little bit with you. And while I was waking up from the nap, just kind of in that little zone where I just almost felt whispers from Him. And whoa, what? And they were just little things that maybe he'd waited a long time to share with me, but now I had space and time to hear. And the next thing I knew, I just kind of reached over for my tablet and I started writing some of those things down. And God, man, thank you that I got relaxed enough that I stopped doing all the talking, and I could even hear your whispers. And for some of you, you're freaking out because you're thinking, I don't like to be alone. I don't want to do a alone thing with God. I do life better in the company of others. Maybe you ought to consider doing a double date or a quadruple date or a triple date, where you get some friends and say, hey, let's go do a date with God. And you start the day together and you kind of share notes, and then you spread out. I've got friends that I've done this with, and we'll go our own separate locations and have some time alone with God, and then we'll come back and talk about some things and pray for each other, and then we'll head out again and come back again. I did a 24-hour, I had some friends of mine that we just booked a spot out by a lake, and we overnighted, and we had our trio date with God. It was pretty cool. What I want to encourage you is that this has been a game changer. When I saw that it was something Jesus did in the scriptures, and He did it, Luke 5:16 says often, I started building this as a practice in my young life, and I found it to be so game-changing, life-giving, it altered my relationship with God. I have dates in my life, I always have, with people who mean the most to me. I get them on the calendar, and we share intimate time, and we go deeper places than just life would deliver with, hi, how are you, fine, and bye. But we spend extended, relaxed time together. Might be God's been waiting for a date with you. Maybe you've been waiting for something like this. You didn't even know something like this was possible. And you just want to, all the clamor, all the noise of life, you just want to shove life off to the side for a little while and get alone with the one that knows you best. And get this, He knows you best and He still loves you most. He loves you more than anybody. And He'd love to have time. As we close out this time, I remember reading this story about querencia. Querencia is the spot in a bullfighting ring where the matador in a Spanish bullfighting ring knows that when they step into the zone where the bull starts moving, that their goal is to try to keep movement happening. They want the bull to keep moving. So their objective is to keep that bull moving. Because if they can keep the bull from finding querencia. What is querencia? For every bull, it's different. It's a different spot in the ring. But it is the spot in that ring where the bull, if he can slow down enough, in that zone that the bullfighters call querencia, that bull you'll see its nostrils flare and it'll take in breath and it'll take and muster strength. And they say you'll start seeing the muscles begin to flex. It's like a whole spirit of strength and renewal and resurgence comes over that bull. And the matador knows that if that bull finds querencia, that matador will be no match for that bull. Is it time for you to find querencia? I mean, honestly, or have you been just moving, and you just got to get it to stop? And you need to get alone in that space and place with God, who knows how to help you find resurgence and renewal and a reinvigoration in your spiritual muscle. You're going to come out of there like Jesus came out of His dates alone with God, with clarity, with power, with precision, with feeling well-loved, well-nurtured, well-cared for, and come out with all sorts of kingdom explosion and kingdom advance, fruit, Jesus said, much fruit, that just begins to overflow from your life, because your greatest gift to this world is coming from your intimacy with God.